So Rudi, we talked a bit about your sort of after post-DCU stuff. Now I'm going to ask you about some stuff to do with your thesis you did here and that we're all very afraid of. So starting from like the ground up, you brainstormed obviously the idea. Did you have any other ideas that were challenging it, or were you?
I'll tell you, Ronan, we'll take a step back for a second. I was mentioning this briefly before we went on air, that what you need to do really before third year is figure out who you're going to do it with, because it takes two to tango. It takes 3 or 4 to make a final year project, because we don't want to end up in a situation where you come back in September, you're like, hey guys, what's going on? Great summer, you know, and then you've no group and you're left on your own and you're scrambling and you end up in another project that, you know, you don't like the idea. And like, to be honest, the idea is kind of the core thing that's going to drive you on, because if you don't have a good idea and you're not invested in it, you're not going to work hard. So before you even brainstorm your idea, you want to have a group and you want to know who you're with. And generally groups grow organically around friendships, because obviously they're bonds you've formed that are strong. So you've been through crap before, you know that like you've done projects and get annoyed with each other, blah, blah, blah. So realistically, you want to have a group pretty much in mind. So once you have said group, you would want then to brainstorm an idea or take an idea you already have and bring it on further. So if you have an idea, you obviously sit down and develop it. So you have a lot of brainstorming sessions. If it's a video, obviously you're going to have writers meetings. You're going to talk about what you want to do, and if it's an application, you're going to ask what's the application for, what's the end use, what process you're going to use. If it's video, photography, whatever, you're just going to figure out what the ins and outs are. One thing to bear in mind while brainstorming always is your audience. You're doing this for someone. There's no point in me sitting here talking to you guys about what I think was great about multimedia, and oh lads, we went and we had pizza all the time, it was great, but like that's no good to you. So obviously you want to hear about the stuff you don't know about. Same with your audience, they want to know what you can tell them. You know, don't just think, oh, this is a great idea, I love this is brilliant. Oh, you know, always try, and I know it's very hard to have an objective point of view and to see it from their side and what you're trying to do. So your brainstorm will be the first thing, come up with your core concept. Obviously you have to present then in December, you have to present that before a panel, you want to have a solid idea. But the key thing I think with you guys more so than us is that you have to have an academic reasoning behind it. So you want to make sure that if you're doing something, you know why you're doing it, not that it's just a good idea.
So have some backup there just to...
Definitely.
Because I like the biggest problem like I find is coming up with ideas for the project. So obviously once that's out of the way, you have to actually get into the stuff. And you were mentioning a lot about production and like producing, and a lot of the stuff is pre-preparation before you even get out there. And like obviously when you were doing it, you were a student. Was it hard to sort of, as a student, get in contact? Because obviously if you're a massive producer, it might be a bit easier to get locations and people together. But I feel like as a student, you'd probably be at a little bit of a disadvantage nearly.
Of course, you are at a disadvantage because you haven't got the resources behind you, and that's what makes it challenging. But there are a lot of, obviously there's a lot of students in Ireland and there's a lot of facilities that support that. So as I said, the IFI, Film Base especially, like become a member, as I said already, will help you with that, because they go through the same thing. And there's like, to be honest, you're no different from a short filmmaker really, because like, okay, they might have a bit of IFB, like they might have Irish Film Board support, maybe a little bit of money, but generally everyone making short films has none. So you actually have an advantage with the resources you have. So it is difficult, but like luckily, and I mentioned this point already, but networks, we all have a network of people and friends and associates that we all know, and it's use them, pump them. Like, you know, if you know someone has a house that'll be good, ask them, can you film there? If you know someone has a car, if you know someone has this, that or the other, you know, do that. Financially it can be difficult. The Kessler Cineslider for us, we rented it for 2 days a day, I think even. It was 2 days, I think even, or was it a weekend? I think it was a weekend. And it was like €300. Now, how do you compare production value to monetary value? Well, if it's going to it's going to elevate it to that kind of, you know, better look, it's going to look great. You know, if you have a dynamic shot and you've actually got camera movement and it's going to really look different and good, then it's worth it. But it's kind of about balancing it out. But to the point of pre-production is kind of what you're going to need. Like it almost sounds, I know, really, really boring, but you have to almost make it surgical and clinical. Like, and it's kind of weird to say that with something so creative, but you need to have a very good, broken down idea. And there's lots of things like, I don't know if you ever heard of Freddie Wong, did the Rocket Jump, Drop Jump, what, VGHS, Video Game High School, huge series, second year, brilliant series, but there's so many behind the scenes. You can see the production that goes on there, and it gives you a really good appreciation of how, on a budget and maybe with not much money, maybe this is more the first season, how you can put things together, you know, and how you can fake things a lot. So like, you go a long way with your resources. And like, we studied a book called guerrilla video making, and it was all about kind of doing things on the sly and doing things cheaply, and it actually went through the entire book comparing shots and how to actually duplicate a shot without any big budget or whatever. So it's great. Like, you know, there's a lot of resources out there that help people.
Check it. What was the
guerrilla video making?
Guerrilla video making. I'll have to do that.
As in guerrilla warfare.
Ah yes, that should.
That's
especially next year.
G-U-E-R-I. As opposed to G-O-R, because
Yeah.
guerrilla filmmaking can just be a whole other thing.
Sounds like a very interesting documentary.
I can think now it's just the Cadbury advert in my head.
I just like strap a GoPro onto a gorilla and have him run through the jungle.
Getting the GoPro on, I think would be the difficult part first.
Sedate him, be fine. Another part of that being taken seriously, obviously you need a director on your project because you need someone who needs to say, right, you do this, you do that.
Yeah.
And I assume the actors you were working with, you were one of the first people to actually use actors in your thesis. Were they difficult to work with because you were a student and then...
No, they had the utmost respect for the fact that what we were doing, like they know you're both investing something in it, and it's our final project. It's their career, so you're both putting it. So as long as you're not obviously being stupid about it or coming across like you're an idiot, you'll be fine. Like if you're turning up late and you're promising dates, you're not following through, or no one's gonna have any trust. Whereas you set out your stall very early, like we did. We had auditions, we had like food there, we had release forms, we had everything, so they knew we meant business, So there was no kind of question of that. So if you take yourself seriously, then they will too. Whereas we don't, obviously no one else will either.
That's very handy to know.
It is, and with regards to directing, like you just need to have a clear idea. Again, come back to pre-production, measure twice, cut once. You know what you want, then you tell them what you want. And obviously they can take that and they can change it, and that's fine, but you have to give them a clear idea of what you're looking for. So, like, not to get into scary levels of pre-production, but like our idea, we had a woman and a man, they had fallen apart, what was wrong? So we went into complete backstories of careers, and like she was a pharmaceutical rep who went around selling drugs, and the reason they didn't get on was because they had a child who had died, but they had never dealt with it because she was always travelling around, and he was a programmer who'd been working from home, but the child had died, so he had recovered. So we had entire backstories that were never even mentioned, didn't even, in no way, shape or form made it onto camera. But because those characters developed so deeply and had such a resource, because it's like a well, if you have that filled up, they can go to that over and over again. Whereas you say, look, she's sad, she died. You know, like, it's
what
just,
are they taking from that?
They don't take nothing from it, so they can't
need
do
to have we're doing script writing at the moment. You have to have a deep idea of exactly what you need, and I suppose that comes especially across when you're on set. And the final part, I suppose, of everything will be the post-production. So you said you were using Adobe Premiere and stuff. How long did you spend in post-production after you actually shot it?
Ooh, like 4 or 5 weeks, like
4 or 5 weeks.
Like you do a lot, like you do your offline edit, and you have to make sure you're happy with that. And the word I like to use in regard to editing, it's called making. Like I use it, and it's not like any kind of industry standard, but I call it making it lean, where you're trimming away the fat and you're trying to get down to the very core. Like, what are we trying to say here? What are we trying to do? There's always a risk to leave more in, but you're always to remember, especially if your medium, and again, go back to you're delivering to an audience who's watching, but you're trying to keep their interest. So like even the guys here, probably done the cameras are probably all bored, like, oh my god, this guy ever shut up, because you're waffling on. So you got to make sure you cut it down. So first of all, you got to make sure your edit is really lean and you're keeping everyone interested and everyone involved, and that you're kind of, there's points which interest are going to dip, that you're keeping that up. And then obviously you bring on to grading. If there's any effects need to be done, post audio, it can take quite a time, so you would want to have a very good idea. So when we sat down in like January or February to do the project, we had a timeline, a graph done out, if you will, of where we wanted to be and how we wanted it to go. Now nothing went to plan whatsoever, which was terrifying at the time, but we got there. But if you have the plan there, you know exactly what you're doing and you'll get there eventually, but you want to have a very clear idea. Post-production as well, it helps to have someone who knows what they're talking about. So if there's some particular skill or effect or whatever, like we had an effect there, and one of the girls, she got down, she learned it over the course of a couple of weeks. So again, I said to you, if it's projects you want to learn effects, start doing them now, start getting an idea of what you want to do now, so that when it comes to it, you're not like freaking out because you have no idea how to, keyframe. You want to like have, you want to have something happen, say you want to affect a particular transition to happen. If you don't know how to do it, there's no point learning it a week before it's due, because it's not going to be done well.
Yeah, you want to have it polished, of course, as well.
Exactly.
And there's one key thing that, like, looking at your thesis, that was very interesting.
Don't mention it. It's so bad now. It's so.
Well, everyone always looks back on something they've done, and they think it's horrible. But the lack of sound and like just using music, was that like a choice, or was that sort of an on the fly?
That was a contrived choice. That was the whole point was about non-diegetic sound and diegetic sound, and you wouldn't have seen it on the version on the web, but we had two versions, and one had some dialogue with the actors actually screaming and tearing into each other, and others didn't, and more so and less so. So it was just basically kind of querying whether or not people would, how it would affect them. So if you would sound from the set and then you'd sound just music, because we actually, like, as an aside, we actually recorded that whole song in the studio here as well, so it was a whole audio element to our thesis we won't go into. But it's a long process as well. But, that was purposefully done. And again, like, we tried to just kind of mess around with what we thought would have an effect on people the most. So obviously, in some ways, having no dialogue is kind of good because people project, and they project what they estimate is happening or they think is happening. And in other ways, then people, you know, like to have a very good idea. Some people are very people, and they like to know, like to hear everything that's going on. They're like, what's he saying? What's she saying? And so it kind of depends on your audience and stuff. But it was done on purpose to try out different
And then
things.
I suppose like that's where the actors come in, because
That's the point I was making.
yeah, because if you like, that's where the facial expressions, the body language, that's where they really have to be another class. You said stone, like wooden student actors.
Yeah,
don't
you
really
get
have
that a lot, and because it's kind of like, oh, my friends in drama stock, they'd be deadly at this. And you're like, at the minute, you're useless. Like, no offense, they're only young. Like, generally most people haven't got acting experience. Like, they will get there, will get better, but you need someone who's not as green behind the gills. So, like, I know, apart from the girl we had who was about 8, the 2 actors we had were in their late 20s. You know what I mean? So they've been around and they've done a bit. So, it makes a big difference. That's definitely. Good.
Anyway, I think that's all my questions gone. Is there anything you have in particular that you want to say about your thesis? Tips you learned since then?
Tips?
I suppose, as I said, everyone knows
if you're doing any kind of media project, always have kind of room for observation. So give it to other people, and don't be afraid to, like J.K. Rowling, now sorry to quote a child's author, has a phrase, you know, don't be afraid to murder your babies, murder your children. So if you're something you're particularly a fan of, it may not be good. Don't be afraid of letting it go. You know, let it go. If you show it to someone and they're like, that doesn't really work, either, you know, think of reworking it or get rid of it altogether. Do not direct and write and edit. Do not let those 3 roles fall on one person, because if you write it and you direct it and you edit it, everything makes sense to you. You're like, oh, of course, there's a natural progression from here to, and suddenly then when you show it to someone else, you go, oh my God, there's a huge hole in the storyline. I never saw that, because you'll never see it. So try and mix up the roles in the group that you're gonna have a very clear idea of. You know, someone's going to edit and they're going to be different to the person who directed it, or someone who wrote it is going to be different, because you'll never see it the same way. You'll always be biased toward it, and the story will always make sense to you. And enjoy it. Enjoy the rest of college. Go join a society. Go abroad. Do something mad. YOLO.
I suppose that's a good tips there. So, thanks for coming in anyway.